Let's dive into a story that starts as a pretty standard business deal, an auction for a historic hotel. But it quickly blows up into a massive legal case that goes all the way to the Supreme Court. It's a case that really forced a country to ask itself some tough questions. So what do you choose? Money or something a little less tangible? That's exactly what the Philippine Supreme Court had to figure out. You've got the simple rules of an auction on one side and the Constitution, the highest law of land, on the other. So let's break down how this incredible clash went down. Okay, so here's the timeline. It all kicks off when the government decides to sell off a controlling stake, 51%, of the super historic Manila Hotel. During the auction, a Malaysian company comes in with the highest bid. But then a local Filipino company steps up and says, hey, we'll match that price. And the government says, nope. And that refusal, that's what lit the fuse for this whole legal firestorm.
And you can see here, the bids were actually pretty close. The local company, Manila Prince Hotel, put in a bid for just over 41 pesos a share. But the Malaysian firm, Renom Berhad, just squeaked by them at 44 pesos. So if you're just looking at the numbers, you'd think, okay, case closed, right? The highest bidder wins.
But this is where it gets interesting. The Manila Prince Hotel didn't just pack up and go home. Nope. They sent a letter officially matching that 44 peso bid. They even sent a manager's check for 33 million pesos to show they were serious. But the government wouldn't take it, basically saying, sorry, rules are rules. So Manila Prince Hotel did the only thing they could. They took the fight straight to the Supreme Court. Now, their case wasn't really about the nitty-gritty details of the auction rules. Their entire argument was built on something much, much bigger, a powerful idea tucked away inside the nation's own constitution. This one sentence, this single line from the Philippine Constitution, became the absolute heart of this whole legal battle. The lawyers for Manila Prince Hotel argued that this isn't just some nice patriotic suggestion. They said it's a direct, enforceable command. So the Manila Prince Hotel's argument was actually pretty straightforward. It boils down to this. 1, the Constitution says you have to give preference to Filipinos. 2, the Manila Hotel is so historic, it's got to be part of the national patrimony or heritage. And 3, because of that, as a qualified Filipino company, they have the constitutional right to match the highest foreign bid and take home the prize. Simple as that. But of course, the government saw things completely differently. They had their own interpretation of what that constitutional clause meant and what they were actually selling. And this right here, this is the core of the whole fight. Was that Filipino First Policy a direct rule that had to be followed right now, or was it just a general guideline for politicians to think about later? You know, something that would need a whole new law from Congress before it actually did anything. So the government lawyers came back with 3 main points. First, they argued that clause in the Constitution isn't self-executing, meaning it's just a suggestion for future laws. Second, they claimed national patrimony only means natural resources, things like mines, forests, stuff you pull out of the ground, not a building. And their third point was, hey, we're not even selling the hotel itself, we're selling shares in a company. This put the court in a really tough spot. Do you stick to the strict black and white rules of the auction, which clearly favored the highest bidder, or do you lean on a constitutional principle that puts national identity ahead of the best price? The stage was set for a huge, landmark decision. So how did the court untangle this mess? Well, its final answer would literally change the game for how business and national identity interact in the Philippines. Okay, so the Supreme Court started out by giving the government a little credit. They basically said, look, we get it. If you only look at the auction rules, yeah, the Malaysian firm was the highest bidder, no doubt about it. But then they pulled out the ultimate trump card. The court reminded everyone that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and its rules are, and I'm quoting here, deemed written in every statute and contract. In other words, no business deal, no government regulation can ever overrule the Constitution. So, the court's final decision was crystal clear. They sided with the Manila Prince Hotel. When you have a conflict between simple bidding rules and the Constitution, there's no contest. The Constitution wins every single time. But honestly, the why they won is even more fascinating than the fact that they won. The court's reasoning was based on how it defined 2 really important legal ideas, and it completely tore down the government's entire case. First up, the court flat out rejected the government's claim that the Filipino First Policy was just a friendly suggestion. They declared it to be self-executing. And that's a fancy legal way of saying it's a direct command. It works right away, on its own. It doesn't need another law from Congress to give it teeth. It's a rule, not a guideline. Second, and this was a total game changer, the court took on the definition of national patrimony. Remember how the government tried to say it was just natural resources? Well, the court said not even close.
The court broadened the whole idea of patrimony. It said it's not just about what's in the ground, it's also about the cultural heritage of the people. And then they explicitly called out the Manila Hotel, calling it a living testimonial of Philippine heritage, and officially declared it part of the national patrimony.
So what does preference actually mean in the real world? The court laid it out for everyone, step by step. If a Filipino and a foreigner are bidding on national patrimony and the foreigner's bid is higher, the Filipino bidder must be given the chance to match that higher bid. And if they do, the Filipino wins, period. End of story. And the impact of this decision went so far beyond who got to own one building. It set a huge precedent about what a nation should value most. And the court did not hold back in its final written decision. It described the idea of selling the hotel to a foreign company when a Filipino was willing to pay the same price as a veritable alienation of a nation's soul for some pieces of foreign silver. I mean, wow. That is incredibly powerful language to see in a court ruling. So what's the big takeaway here? The ruling basically established that things you can't put a price tag on, like national pride and heritage, actually have real legal power. The court confirmed that sometimes these values are more important than purely financial goals. It sent a message loud and clear: a nation's identity is not for sale. And really, that's the question this whole case leaves us with. It goes way beyond law books and courtrooms. When you're talking about national treasures, what's the real cost? It's a deep question, and one that this amazing case forces us all to think about.